The first time I heard the distress signal, I was halfway through a bottle of cheap rum and trying not to think about home. Space has a way of making a man forget why he ever left Earth, but every now and then, the silence gets too loud, and you start remembering faces you'll never see again. That night, the silence was shattered by a desperate, high-pitched wail piped through the comms, an SOS unlike anything I'd heard before. It wasn't human. The voice, if you could even call it that, was all static and trembling, every word breaking under the weight of panic. "Please, anyone, they are killing us. They will take the last of us tonight. Please!" The coordinates flashed alongside the message, a sector so far from Earth it might as well have been in another universe. I almost ignored it. Not my problem, not my fight. But then Command got wind of it, and suddenly the Steel Reaper and her crew were pointed straight at that signal. Orders were short and sharp. Investigate. Contain. Eliminate threat. The thing is, we weren't a rescue fleet. The Steel Reaper was a Deathworlder warship, and our containment usually meant glassing whatever was left of a problem. That's the reputation Earth's soldiers had earned over centuries. When we arrived, it wasn't to talk. The crew was quiet during the burn to the coordinates. Even the newer recruits kept their mouths shut. No jokes, no card games. We'd all read the intercepted chatter from nearby systems. Something about hive swarms stripping planets bare in days, leaving nothing but husks. The aliens calling for help were supposed to be a peaceful, delicate race, the kind that wouldn't last 10 minutes in a fistfight, let alone against galaxy-eating vermin. We dropped out of FTL to find their world burning. I've seen war zones before, but this was different. Cities like glassy tombstones, skies choked with black ash, and shapes, too fast to track, moving just beyond the tree line. The aliens themselves were huddled in the wreckage, thin as shadows, eyes so wide they looked ready to shatter. Their leader, or maybe just the one brave enough to speak, stumbled forward. His skin was pale and almost translucent, like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. "You came," he whispered, voice breaking. "We thought no one would—" I didn't say anything. I didn't tell him that if it had been up to me, we wouldn't have. I didn't tell him that Earth didn't do charity work. We were here because Command had decided this infestation couldn't spread any further, and sometimes that meant playing the hero for people who'd never understand the cost. We set up a perimeter, and that's when the first wave hit. They didn't come like an army. They came like a flood. Hundreds of them, all teeth and claws and armor-like skin, moving with a speed that made my stomach turn. The alien civilians screamed and scattered, but we didn't move an inch. We had railguns, thermal repeaters, and men who'd fought in places so hostile they'd make this burning jungle look like a picnic ground. "Light 'em up!" I barked, and the air turned into a wall of heat and thunder. Creatures exploded under the barrage, black ichor spraying the ground, but for every one that fell, 3 more took its place. The smell was the worst part, burning chitin and rotting meat, so thick it clung to the back of your throat. One of the smaller aliens, a child maybe, latched onto my leg in terror. I didn't shake him off. Couldn't. Not while the swarm closed in. I shoved him toward one of the med techs and waded deeper into the fight, railgun kicking against my shoulder until my arms burned. This wasn't a battle. It was extermination. And deep down, I knew that was exactly why Command had sent us. The swarm broke after 47 minutes, not because they were beaten, because they were dead. The jungle went silent except for the hiss of cooling weapons and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The alien leader approached again, his voice trembling. You saved us." I didn't correct him, didn't tell him this was only the first night, and the real problem wasn't the swarm, it was us. Because once Deathworlders arrive, the problem always ends. Permanently. The second night was worse, but not because of the swarm. The swarm was gone, burned, blasted, shredded into nothing. What made it worse was the silence that came after. The alien city, if you could still call it that, was just a skeleton of glass towers, their edges melted from the heat of our guns. We'd cleared the infestation, but the land still stank like rot and scorched bone. The aliens thought they'd been saved. You could see it in their eyes, wide, almost worshipful whenever they looked at us. They didn't understand. People never do, not until they see what help looks like when it comes from Earth. We started securing the perimeter on the second day. That meant pushing the surviving population into a central camp and locking it down with barricades, guard posts, and armed patrols. Their leader, thin, trembling, too polite to argue, tried to ask why. I told him the truth. You called for help. Now your world's under quarantine until we know the threat's gone for good. No one leaves. He didn't like it. None of them did. But they didn't have the muscle or the weapons to stop us. From that moment, their tone changed. They weren't thanking us anymore. They were watching us, whispering in their strange, musical language when they thought we couldn't hear. Even the kids kept their distance, except for that one small one from the first night. He'd linger around the edges of the camp, staring at me like he was trying to figure out whether I was a savior or a monster. I didn't have an answer for him. 3 days in, Command sent the next set of orders. Purge surrounding sectors. Nothing leaves atmosphere. Burn and sweep. That was when I saw the shift in my crew. This wasn't war to them. It was cleanup. They loaded fuel canisters and incendiaries into the dropships like they were packing for a weekend trip. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Some of these men had been Deathworld infantry since before they could legally drink. They'd seen what happens when infestations slip containment. In their minds, we weren't destroying a planet. We were saving the galaxy. The aliens didn't see it that way. When the first forest went up in flames, their leader came to me again. He was shaking harder this time, but there was anger in it now, not fear. You cannot destroy everything. We can rebuild! I looked him in the eye and told him something I'd learned a long time ago. Rebuilding is your problem. Making sure there's nothing left to rebuild from, that's mine. The look on his face told me he finally understood the mistake they'd made. They hadn't called for rescue. They'd called for Deathworlders. And once we arrive, we don't stop halfway. By the end of the week, the swarm's nests were gone, their carcasses burned to ash. But so were the surrounding cities, the farmlands, the rivers choked with fuel runoff. We didn't leave patches untouched, because patches become problems. One night, while making rounds, I found the small alien kid again. He was sitting outside the barricades, staring at the smoke on the horizon. I sat next to him. He didn't look at me when he spoke. You kill everything, he said quietly. Not a question. Everything that's dangerous, I replied. He turned to me then, eyes bright in the firelight. We lived here. Was that dangerous too? I didn't answer him. Because in my line of work, sometimes it was. The first time I heard one of them cry at night, I ignored it. It was faint, carried on the wind, too far from the barricade to matter. Out here, you learned quick not to chase every sound. It was either nothing or something you didn't want to find. But by the third night in a row, the same sound, low, broken, dragging through the dark like it was bleeding, had worked its way under my skin. I grabbed my rifle, keyed my helmet lamp, and walked the perimeter. The air was damp with the stink of the burn zones, and the ground crunched under my boots where ash had settled like black snow. 200 meters from the camp, I found it. A female, at least I thought so, curled against the remains of a collapsed structure, her arms tight around herself, her skin a pale blue that had gone almost gray. She didn't move when the light hit her. Didn't even flinch when my shadow fell over her. I crouched down. "You're supposed to be inside the barricade." Her eyes lifted, glassy and wet. "Inside is prison." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. She looked past me, toward the orange glow where the last of the forests burned. "You burn everything. Soon, nothing left." Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from something heavier. Resignation. I'd seen that look before, on worlds where the fight had been over long before we arrived. Places where our arrival was just the last nail in the coffin. When I stood, she didn't stop me. She just lowered her head again, small and silent under the shadow of our warship in orbit. The orders kept coming, and they didn't change. We swept through every remaining district with the same pattern. Burn, sweep, leave nothing standing that could hide a single egg or a single larva. The swarm had been relentless, but it had at least left parts of the cities untouched. We didn't. And that was when the survivors started fighting back. It wasn't much at first. Someone refusing to leave a building before it was torched, a few shouts from behind barricade lines, a thrown rock that pinged uselessly off a trooper's armor. But within days, it escalated. Sabotaged supply crates, comms interference, a sentry found with his throat cut outside Sector 12. Command called it resistance. I called it inevitability. You take away someone's home, burn their food, lock them in a cage, and eventually, they're going to push back. We doubled patrols. Civilians were searched daily. Anyone caught outside the camp without authorization was detained, or shot if they ran. The crew adjusted fast. Deathworlders didn't believe in half measures. One afternoon, while overseeing a supply drop, the alien leader approached again. His gait had changed. Slower, heavier, like the weight of what was happening was crushing him bone by bone. His once bright skin had dulled to a sickly gray. "You've killed more of us than the swarm did," he said without preamble. "Not true," I told him flatly. "The swarm wiped most of your population before we even got here." "But you finished the work." I didn't deny it. "We make sure it never happens again." He stepped closer, voice low. "You are the danger now." That one stung, not because it wasn't true, but because it was exactly what I'd been thinking since the first night. I could have argued. Could have told him we'd saved more lives than we'd taken. But I'd be lying, and he'd know it. Instead, I told him the one thing I could say without choking on it. "You sent the signal. This is what Earth's help looks like." He looked at me for a long time, as if trying to burn my face into memory. Then he turned and walked back toward the camp without another word. By the second week, the camp was splitting into two groups. The first were the ones still clinging to the idea that we were here to protect them. They stayed quiet, obeyed orders, tried not to make eye contact. The second were the ones who'd stopped pretending. You could see it in their eyes when they looked at us. Anger replacing fear, hate replacing gratitude. I kept catching that kid from the first night in places he wasn't supposed to be. By the gates, near the supply tents, watching the dropships take off. One night, I found him crouched near a stack of fuel canisters. "What are you doing?" I asked. He flinched but didn't run. "You're leaving soon, right? After burning?" "Not until command says so." His jaw tightened, and his small hands curled into fists. "Then I hope they say soon, before there's nothing left." I should have sent him back to the camp under guard, but instead I just walked away. Maybe part of me wanted him to hold on to that anger. Maybe I thought he'd need it. The first real clash came 3 nights later. A patrol didn't check in. By the time we found them, 2 soldiers were dead, throats slit, their gear stripped. Tracks led into the ruins beyond the barricade. Light, quick feet that could only belong to the locals. Command's response was immediate and brutal. The next morning, we pulled 20 civilians from the camp at random. No accusations, no trials. The message was simple. Harm a Deathworlder and your people pay the price. I wasn't proud of it. But I didn't stop it either. Because I knew what came next if we didn't crush the resistance now. Long, grinding months of blood on both sides. We'd been through it before. That night, the crying started again. Louder this time. Not one voice, but dozens, carried across the scorched city like the wind itself was grieving. Something shifted in me after that. I'd spent years telling myself we were the galaxy's last line of defense, the necessary evil that kept the rest of the civilized world safe from threats they couldn't handle. But watching those 20 bodies burned to ash in the same fire we'd lit for the swarm, I started wondering if there was any real difference between the things we fought and the way we fought them. When I looked at my crew, I didn't see protectors anymore. I saw predators, well-trained, disciplined, lethal, but predators all the same, and the aliens saw it too. The next orders came down like a hammer. Full purge of all non-cleared zones, civilian relocation to primary extraction point. Translation: drive them all into one place, burn everything else. The leader came to me again that night. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like a man who'd already buried his hope. "When you go," he said, "there will be nothing left for us." "You'll survive," I told him. He shook his head. "Survive is not live. You take our world, you take our food, you take our sky. You say you save us, but you only make sure we are no threat to you." He wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. The purge started at dawn. Dropships roared overhead, laying firestorms across the outer districts. Anything that could burn, burned. Anything that didn't, we blasted into rubble. The sound was deafening, explosions rolling like thunder, buildings collapsing with screams buried in the dust. From the ridge above the main camp, I watched the sky darken with smoke until it swallowed the sun. The kid stood next to me again, silent this time. His face was lit by the glow of the burning horizon, his eyes empty. "You think we're monsters," I said without looking at him. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat. "I think you're worse." That night, as I walked the perimeter, I realized something I'd been trying not to face since the day we arrived. We hadn't just ended the swarm, we'd ended their world. And when Command finally pulled us out, there'd be nothing left here worth saving. But maybe that was the point. The Resistance stopped hiding on the 4th week. Until then, they'd been shadows. Whispers in the ruins, quick hands in the dark, the occasional slit throat or missing ration crate. Now they started hitting in daylight. It began with a supply convoy, 4 armored transports, 30 men, running the route between the drop point and our main camp. It should have been routine. But halfway in, the lead transport went up in a column of fire so bright it lit the sky. The blast ripped it in half, flipping the second vehicle on its side. The road disintegrated into chaos, shouting, gunfire, and the sound of metal screaming as it tore apart. I was on Overwatch 2 clicks away when it happened. My comms lit with panicked calls, but by the time I got there, it was over. 10 dead. 6 more wounded bad enough they'd need evac to the Reaper. The attackers, ghosts in the ruins, were already gone. The worst part? The explosives were ours. That meant one of 2 things. They'd scavenged from a blast site, or someone inside the camp was handing them the tools to kill us. Command didn't hesitate. Curfew went from nightfall to full lockdown. No one in or out without escort. No exceptions. We doubled the guard on the barricades, and every civilian was searched twice a day. Still, the hits kept coming. fuel depots, communications relays. Even one of our water purifiers was sabotaged, forcing us to drain precious reserves from the Reaper's stores. Every time something blew, the whispers among the crew got darker. Nobody liked being hunted, and Deathworlders don't forgive that kind of insult. We'd already burned their cities, already taken their land. Now we were deciding whether to take the rest of them too. The alien leader didn't come to me this time. He didn't have to. I went to him. I found him in the center of the camp, surrounded by his people. They were thinner now, more sunken, their strange, glassy eyes dull from weeks of smoke and hunger. "You've got fighters out there," I told him, voice low. "You know who they are." He met my gaze without blinking. "They fight for what is left. They're going to get all of you killed." "They already did," he said simply. There was nothing in his tone. No hate, no fear. Just a simple truth he'd accepted. And maybe that was the difference between us. I still hadn't decided if I was fighting to live or just to keep killing. That night, a storm rolled in, drenching the ash-choked ground in black rain. Lightning lit the skeletal remains of the city, and for a moment it looked alive again. Towers gleaming in flashes, streets glistening with wet. Almost beautiful, if you forgot it was a graveyard. It was the perfect night for a raid. I was halfway through my rounds when the power to the southern barricade went dead. The guard's voice cracked over the comms before cutting off with a burst of static. I sprinted for the gate, boots splashing through black puddles. When I got there, the first thing I saw was the body. One of ours, throat open, armor slick with rain and blood. The second thing I saw was the hole where the barricade used to be. They came in fast, 20, maybe 30 of them, moving like they'd drilled for this. The first wave hit hard, knives flashing in the rain, grabbing weapons from the fallen. My rifle barked in short, controlled bursts, cutting down the closest three. But they didn't stop. The fight turned into a brawl in seconds. Steel on steel, boots and fists, the wet slap of bodies hitting the mud. One of them lunged for my side, and I smashed the butt of my rifle into his jaw hard enough to feel the bone break through the stock. Another came from behind, blade catching the light, but I caught his wrist, twisted, and drove his own knife into his throat. By the time reinforcements arrived, the ground was a churn of mud, blood, and bodies. Half the attackers were dead, the rest scattering into the ruins as our gunners tore into them. The gap in the barricade was patched by morning. The memory of that night wasn't. Command's patience broke. The next set of orders wasn't about defense, it was punishment. Suspected insurgents are to be executed immediately. Collateral is acceptable. We all knew what that meant, and for the first time I hesitated. I'd followed orders my whole career. I'd carried out purges, wiped infestations, leveled cities to save the rest of the galaxy from what crawled inside them. But this wasn't the swarm. This wasn't an unstoppable biological threat. This was people. Angry, desperate, stubborn people. Yes, but people all the same. And yet, I still gave the order. The executions started on the 5th week. They didn't make it quick. Prisoners were lined up outside the barricade, kneeling in the mud while the entire camp was forced to watch. The alien leader stood at the front of his people, eyes locked on mine. Not pleading, not begging, just watching. Like he wanted to see if there was any piece of me left under the armor. The first volley cracked through the wet air, and 5 bodies hit the mud. A child cried somewhere in the crowd, and I thought about the small one who always found me on patrols. I didn't look for him. Couldn't. The next volley came, and the next. 13 dead before the guns cooled. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the barricade, staring into the dark beyond the ruins, waiting for something. Guilt, anger, anything, to hit me hard enough to make me stop. It didn't. The retaliation came faster than I expected. 2 days later, a fire ripped through our munitions depot. The blast tore through half the camp, killing 12 soldiers and flattening 3 supply tents. When we pulled the security feeds, I felt my stomach drop. It was the kid. Small frame, quick movements, slipping past the guards like smoke. Planting the charges. Walking away without looking back. I'd seen that same face staring up at me in the firelight weeks ago, asking if we killed everything. Now I had my answer. I found him before anyone else did. He was crouched by the edge of the camp, hands still blackened from the blast. When he saw me, he didn't run. He just straightened, thin and defiant in the shadow of my rifle. "You think I'm afraid to die?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because it wouldn't matter. "You burned our world," he said. "Now I burn yours." "This isn't my world," I told him quietly. His eyes narrowed, but I could see the flicker of confusion there. Before he could speak, the other soldiers arrived, weapons ready. "Orders are clear," one of them said. I nodded, but I didn't hand him over. Not yet. I motioned them back and walked the kid to the southern barricade myself. When we stopped, he looked up at me. "You going to shoot me?" I shook my head. "Not today." He frowned, like he didn't understand. Then I opened the gate. "Go," I said. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he slipped into the ruins, swallowed by the rain and smoke. I knew I'd probably see him again. And next time, he'd be aiming for my throat. The resistance didn't slow after that. It grew bolder, more organized. The attacks became coordinated strikes instead of desperate lunges. They were learning, adapting, turning the ruins into a weapon against us. The crew wanted to escalate again, to turn the camp into a killing field and leave no survivors. Command was listening, and I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until then. The swarm had been the easy part. The real problem was us. The rebellion stopped being whispers and shadows on the 6th week. It became war. It started with a hit on our eastern outpost. 20 soldiers stationed there, fortified in a reinforced prefab with enough firepower to hold off a swarm attack for days. The resistance took it in under an hour. We didn't even get a distress call, just static, then silence. When we arrived, the place was gutted. The walls were pocked with blast holes, the inside scorched black from explosives. Every soldier was dead. Some shot, some burned, some torn apart. The bodies had been left in the open, not hidden. A message. No one said it out loud, but I knew what that meant. They'd stopped fearing us. Command didn't wait for the autopsy reports. Orders came through in a flat, unshakable voice. "All remaining civilians are to be relocated to the extraction point. Resistance fighters are to be eliminated on site. No exceptions. No mercy." They called it relocation, but we all knew the truth. Pull everyone into one place where we could watch them, starve them, break them, and finish the purge without distractions. We prepped for the operation before dawn. Dropships loaded with soldiers and heavy weapons roared into the sky. My unit's job was simple. Sweep the southern sectors, drive anyone we found toward the main camp, and kill anyone who didn't move fast enough. It should have been routine. It wasn't. The first house we cleared was empty, except for the smell, smoke, oil, and something sweet rotting in the heat. The second had 2 civilians inside, huddled under a collapsed beam. They didn't fight. They didn't beg. They just stared at us while we hauled them to their feet and pushed them toward the street. We got halfway down the block before the ambush hit. The first shot took out the man beside me, helmet cracked like glass, head gone before his body hit the dirt. Then the street lit up in a hail of fire. Shots came from the rooftops, the alleys, even from holes blasted in the walls. The air turned into a storm of dust and shrapnel. We hit the ground, returning fire in short, vicious bursts. I saw one fighter drop from a rooftop, tumbling to the ground with half his chest gone. Another leapt from a doorway, screaming something in his language before my rifle cut him down mid-step. But for everyone we killed, 2 more moved into place. They were coordinated now, fast, disciplined, and using the terrain better than we ever could. We pulled back, dragging the civilians with us, but the resistance pressed hard. I tossed a grenade into an alley where movement flickered, the blast shaking the ground and sending chunks of stone raining over us. By the time we broke through to open ground, 4 more soldiers were dead. The civilians we'd been hauling were gone, either fled or taken. I didn't know which. We fell back to regroup with the rest of the unit. The comms were chaos, reports of similar ambushes all over the sector. Fighters popping up like ghosts, striking, vanishing, leaving us bleeding in the streets. "This isn't hit and run," one of my men muttered as we ducked into cover. "They're hunting us." He was right, and they weren't just after soldiers. They were hitting supply routes, fuel depots, med stations, anything that kept the Reaper's war machine moving. That night, Command called for a full lockdown and ordered every available squad to prep for a sweep of the ruins at first light. But before we could even begin, the rebellion came to us. It happened just before dawn. The camp was quiet except for the hum of the barricade generators and the soft hiss of rain on the metal. I was making my rounds when I heard it, a low, steady thrum in the distance. Dropships? Number 2 uneven. Then the first explosion tore through the north gate. Shrapnel ripped through the air, slicing through armor and flesh alike. The shockwave knocked me flat, my ears ringing so hard I couldn't hear my own breath. When I staggered up, the night was alive with muzzle flashes and fire. They'd come in force this time, hundreds of them, pushing through the breach in a tide of bodies and gunfire. They weren't scattered raiders anymore. This was a coordinated assault, and it was aimed at driving us out for good. I took position behind a barricade of sandbags, firing into the wave until my rifle overheated. They came over the bodies of their own dead, screaming war cries that rattled even the veterans on my line. One of them vaulted the barricade right in front of me, blade flashing in the dim light. I caught his wrist, slammed my helmet into his face, and drove a knife into his gut. He crumpled, but 3 more were right behind him. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning flesh. My comms were a constant roar of orders, screams, and static. Somewhere to my left, a grenade went off, spraying the barricade with pieces of what used to be 2 men. We held for 40 minutes before the second breach hit, this time from the west. They'd split their forces, driving us to stretch thin. By the time reinforcements closed the western gap, half the camp was burning. The med tents were gone. So was one of the ammo depots. And worse, they'd gotten into the supply yard and made off with crates of explosives. Command's voice came over the comms, calm but cold. "Priority 1, secure the Reaper. If they breach the landing zone, pull out." I'd been on a dozen battlefields, but I'd never heard Command even suggest a retreat before. That told me everything I needed to know about how bad it was. We pushed back hard, driving the fighters toward the ruins. But it wasn't victory. Not really. The camp was in shambles, and we'd lost almost a third of our strength in a single night. When the smoke cleared, I walked the line, checking the wounded. That's when I saw him. The kid. He was lying among the bodies outside the north gate, blood slick on his face, eyes half open. For a second, I thought he was dead. Then his gaze locked on mine. "You can't kill us all," he rasped. I didn't answer. I just stepped over him and kept walking. Because he was wrong. We could. And if this kept up, we would. That night, command met with the remaining officers. The plan was simple and brutal. End this within 72 hours. Use everything you need. No survivors in active resistance zones. It was the kind of order Deathworlders were built for, and I knew, deep down, that the planet wouldn't survive it. The swarm had been a plague. We'd been the cure. But cures can be poison if you give too much. And by the time we were done, nothing here would grow again. Not the cities, not the people, not even the land. Command's voice over the comms was steady, almost too calm. 72 hours, all sectors, no survivors in resistance zones. It wasn't an order, it was a sentence, and everyone in that room knew it. The Purge Doctrine was simple. Divide the city into grids, sweep each one from the outside in, and leave nothing standing. Fire, explosives, gas, whatever stripped a target down to bone and dust fastest. The swarm hadn't survived this approach. Neither would the people who'd called us here. I didn't speak during the briefing. None of us did. Orders like this didn't leave room for debate. If you had doubts, you swallowed them. If you didn't, well, that meant you'd been doing this long enough to stop having them. We started before dawn. The Steel Reaper hung in the sky like a silent god, her shadow stretching across the ruins. Dropships screamed over the city, spilling soldiers into the streets. The first wave hit the eastern districts, artillery and incendiaries pounding the old marketplaces until they were nothing but sheets of fire and twisted steel. My unit moved into the southern sector, where the fighting had been thickest in recent days. Resistance snipers had made a habit of harassing our patrols from the upper floors of abandoned towers, so we didn't bother trying to clear them room by room. We just brought the towers down. The blasts were deafening. Concrete and glass fell like rain, swallowing alleys whole. Somewhere beneath the rubble, there were bodies. Fighters, maybe civilians. At this stage, it didn't matter which. By midday, the air was a choking haze of smoke and dust. Every street stank of burning fuel and cooked flesh. My visor display was useless in the haze, so we moved slow, checking every corner, every shadow. We found pockets of resistance, small groups who'd stayed behind to fight instead of fleeing deeper into the city. Some went down shooting, others rushed us with knives or makeshift explosives. One man came at us with nothing but a metal pipe, screaming until the moment a burst from my rifle cut him in half. We didn't take prisoners. Not anymore. Around the second hour, we hit a school. The windows were shattered, the walls scorched from earlier firefights, but the structure was still standing. My point man signaled movement inside. We breached. The first room we cleared had desks scattered like bones, papers and books soaked in rainwater from a hole in the roof. In the second room, we found them. 13 civilians, most too young to be fighters. The oldest, maybe 17, stepped forward, hands raised. There was something hard in his eyes. "They're not here," he said in broken human speech. "The fighters, they left." Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. At this stage, it didn't matter. Command's rules for resistance zones didn't leave space for negotiation. My men were waiting for the order. I hesitated, just for a second. But a second was too long. The 17-year-old saw it. His hands dropped. His eyes shifted toward the door. I knew what that meant. "Down!" I barked, and my men opened fire. The echoes rolled through the building long after the last body hit the floor. We burned the school after we left. Not because it was tactically necessary, but because we didn't want to come back tomorrow and find someone else hiding in it. That was how Deathworlders worked. Remove the threat, then remove the ground it stands on. That night, we regrouped with the other units. The city was half gone already, fires still raging in every direction. Resistance activity had dropped sharply, but it wasn't gone. Snipers still took pot shots from the far west, and there were rumors of fighters regrouping in the underground transit tunnels. Command's response was predictable. Collapse the tunnels. We packed the entrances with explosives and brought them down one by one. You could feel the ground shake for blocks when they fell. Hear the deep, hollow boom of stone and steel crushing whatever was inside. I didn't go looking to see if anyone made it out. The second day of the purge was worse. We pushed into the Central District, the last real stronghold before the West. It was denser here, the streets narrower, the buildings taller and closer together. Perfect for an ambush, and they took full advantage. The first rocket hit our lead vehicle, tearing the transport in half and showering the street with burning debris. Fighters poured out of side alleys, firing from every angle. My unit dropped into cover and returned fire, but we were outnumbered 3-1. They fought like they knew it was the end. No retreat, no fallback, just wave after wave, trying to drag as many of us down as they could. One of them rushed my position, a grenade clutched in both hands. I dropped him with 3 rounds to the chest, but the grenade still went off when he fell. The blast tore the wall behind me apart and sent me sprawling into the dirt. I got back up, ears ringing, vision swimming. My men were still holding, but barely. We called in air support, and within minutes, the street was swallowed in a storm of gunfire from above. When the dust cleared, there was nothing left moving. That night, I found the alien leader again. He was in the relocation zone, sitting alone near the perimeter fence. His clothes were filthy, his skin dulled to a sickly gray, but his eyes still burned with something I couldn't name. "You think you win," he said when I stopped in front of him, "but you only kill. You cannot win against a people who have nothing left to lose." "You've already lost," I told him. He shook his head slowly. "Number you have. You just don't see it yet." I didn't answer, not because I didn't have one, but because I was starting to think he might be right. On the third and final day, we hit the western sector. It was supposed to be the cleanup. Small pockets of resistance, nothing organized. But the fighters had saved their last strength for this. They met us with barricades made of burned-out vehicles, booby traps in every doorway, and sniper nests in the upper floors. Every block was a fight. We cleared one street, only to be hit from behind by fighters using the sewer lines. The battle lasted hours. The streets ran with rain and blood. By the time the sun went down, the western sector was nothing but rubble and corpses. We'd done it. The resistance was broken. The purge was over. But as I stood on the edge of what used to be their city, watching the last fires burn out, I realized something. We hadn't saved them from the swarm. We'd just replaced it. And maybe, in the long run, we'd done more damage than the swarm ever could. By the time the last gunshot faded, the city was dead. Not quiet. Dead. Even war zones have a hum to them, the crackle of distant fires, the rumble of machinery, the sound of people moving somewhere beyond the smoke. But here, nothing moved. The wind slipped through shattered streets without a whisper. The fires were eating themselves down to coals. We'd killed the swarm. We'd killed the resistance. And in the process, we'd killed the city itself. Command called it a complete success. Orders for extraction came through on the 4th day after the purge. "Pack up, load what's left of the gear, prepare for orbital departure. Secondary units will remain to enforce quarantine protocols." Translated. We were done here. We'd hand the ashes to someone else and move on to the next fire. The crew started tearing down our fortifications. Barricades came down, ammo crates were loaded into drop ships, and the remaining civilians, what few were still breathing, were herded toward the relocation zone. They didn't resist. They didn't speak. They just moved like ghosts under the barrels of our rifles. I walked the perimeter one last time. The streets we'd fought for were nothing but skeletal ruins. Blackened towers leaned against each other like drunks at closing time. The smell of the purge still hung heavy in the air, a mix of charred stone and something sweeter, meat that had burned too long. It clung to everything. I found the alien leader near the loading area. He was thinner than I remembered, his eyes sunken but still watching everything around him. He didn't look at me until I was close enough for him to hear over the engines. "So, you leave," he said. "Our job's done," I told him. He gave a slow nod, like that was exactly what he'd expected me to say. "And what is left for us?" I didn't have an answer that would matter. Survival, maybe. But survival wasn't living. Before I could speak, a soldier yelled for me from across the yard, something about a missing supply crate. I turned away, and when I looked back, the leader was already walking toward the others, swallowed by the line of civilians shuffling into the waiting dropships. The Steel Reaper's landing zone was a hive of movement when we got there. Dropships coming and going, pallets of gear stacked high, crews shouting over the whine of engines. I was halfway to the ramp when the comms lit up. "South barricade breach. Multiple hostiles inside the perimeter." For a heartbeat, I thought it was a mistake. There shouldn't have been any resistance left, not after the purge, but the gunfire in the background told me otherwise. Command's voice cut through the static. "All available units contain and eliminate. Priority is securing the civilians for extraction." I was already running before the channel closed. The breach point was chaos. Smoke hung low over the ground, making every shadow look like movement. My boots splashed through shallow puddles of black water as I pushed towards the sound of the fight. The first body I saw was one of ours, armor cracked, visor shattered. The second was one of theirs, dressed in the rags of the relocation zone but clutching a scavenged rifle. They'd hidden among the civilians, waited until we were breaking camp. Clever, desperate, fatal. We pushed them back in minutes, but the damage was done. 4 soldiers dead, 3 more wounded, and half a dozen civilians caught in the crossfire. The survivors scattered into the ruins, but we didn't chase them. Extraction took priority now. As the medics worked, I saw a smaller figure crouched near the barricade, watching me. The kid. I froze. He looked older now. Leaner, harder. But I knew him instantly. The same eyes, the same sharp stare. His hands were empty, but I didn't trust that for a second. "You're still here," I said. "You're still killing," he replied. I started toward him, but he backed into the smoke, disappearing before I could take 2 steps. That night, I sat in the shadow of the Reaper, helmet off, listening to the slow thump of the ship's reactors. Around me, soldiers laughed, drank, and packed their gear. But it all felt distant. I kept seeing the kid's face, the set of his jaw, the way he'd vanished into the smoke like the city itself had taken him back. He'd survive. I didn't know how, but I was certain of it. And if he did, I knew what he'd grow into. Not a survivor. Not a victim. Something worse. The next morning, we began boarding for departure. The civilians went first, shuttled to secondary holding until the quarantine teams took over. Most didn't look at us. A few spat when they passed, though they didn't have the strength to make it land. The alien leader was last in line. He stopped at the base of the ramp, looking up at the Reaper like he was staring at a tombstone. "You think this is over," he said. "It is for me." "No," he said softly. "For you, it is just beginning." Then he walked up the ramp without another word. I stayed planetside until the final dropship. My unit had perimeter duty, keeping the landing zone secure in case the resistance decided to try again. They didn't. As we lifted off, I looked down at the city one last time. From the air, the ruins looked almost peaceful, like an old scar that had stopped bleeding. But scars don't heal what's underneath. Somewhere down there, I knew the kid was still alive. And I knew we hadn't seen the last of him. From orbit, the planet didn't look dead. That was the first thing that struck me when I stepped to the Steel Reaper's viewing deck. The smoke from the purge was gone now, carried away by upper atmosphere winds. The ocean still glittered a deep green blue. The continents were the same shade of gold and forest that I'd seen when we first arrived. From this distance, you could almost believe it was untouched. That's the lie of space. From far enough away, you can't see the ash choking the rivers. You can't smell the scorched metal and bone. You can't hear the silence where entire cities used to breathe. You can't see the faces of the ones you left behind. We broke orbit on the 5th day after the purge, the Reaper's engines roaring against the pull of the dead world below. The civilians, what remained of them, were secured in quarantine bays deeper in the ship. They'd be handed off to a secondary fleet at a staging point 2 systems away, processed and relocated. That word, I'd learned, was another kind of lie. Most of them wouldn't live long enough to see their new homes. Disease, malnutrition, suicide. Pick your poison. And even for the ones who survived, the relocation sites weren't home. They were cages with better lighting. My unit was off rotation for the first time in weeks. No patrols, no purges, no orders. Just downtime. The others celebrated with the kind of reckless abandon that comes after surviving a mission with your skin intact. Cards, drinks, and loud stories about firefights where the truth bent a little more with each telling. I didn't join them. Instead, I found myself walking the quiet halls of the ship, helmet under one arm, listening to the hum of the Reaper's systems. I passed the quarantine bays once, hearing nothing from inside. No crying, no shouting, just the sterile silence of people too empty to make noise anymore. I told myself it was better this way. If they hated us, it was easier. If they feared us, it was cleaner. But what I'd seen in the alien leader's eyes wasn't hate or fear. It was patience. Patience was worse. 2 days into the voyage, I got the summons. Command wanted my report. Not the official one we'd already filed, but the kind where you sat across from a ranking officer and told them what the paper couldn't say. The captain's quarters were immaculate. No dust, no scratches on the deck, no hint of the dirt and blood we'd waded through down there. He poured himself a drink before he spoke. "You've been doing this a long time," he said. "You've seen operations fail, succeed, and everything in between. This one?" "Complete," I said automatically. "Not what I asked." I looked at him. "We did what we were sent to do. The swarm's gone. The resistance is broken. Planet's under control. And the survivors? They'll never be a threat again." He studied me over the rim of his glass. "That doesn't sound like pride." "It's not my job to feel proud," I said. He smirked faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Maybe not, but it is your job to understand the cost. If you don't, you're dangerous to the wrong people." I didn't answer. He didn't push it. The debrief ended 5 minutes later. We hit the staging point a week later. Another ship. Sleek, white, the kind used for humanitarian relocation, docked alongside us. Crews in clean uniforms boarded to transfer the civilians. I was on loading duty. The survivors shuffled down the Reaper's gangway in a thin, silent line. They were cleaner than when we'd pulled them from the city, but still carried the hollowness of people who'd seen everything they knew burned away. The alien leader was there, of course, near the front. He didn't speak, didn't look at me until he was almost past. When he did, there was no anger in his eyes, no fear, just that same patient, waiting look. "You can leave now," he said quietly. I frowned. "Leave?" He nodded toward the distant stars beyond the docking bay. "Go. Fight your wars. Burn your worlds. We will still be here when you return." Before I could respond, one of the relocation officers urged him forward, and he was gone. That night, I dreamed of the kid. Not as I'd last seen him, thin, dirty, vanishing into the smoke, but older, taller, his eyes sharper, his hand steady on a weapon I'd never seen before. Behind him was a city, not his city but mine, and it was burning. I woke with my hand on the knife at my belt, my heart hammering against my ribs. We jumped systems the next day, heading for our next deployment. Another war zone, another containment. The crew went back to normal, trading rumors about where we'd be sent and who we'd be killing next. But I couldn't stop thinking about that look. The leader's patience, the kid's defiance. Patience means they wait. Defiance means they act. And I knew, with the same certainty I'd known the swarm would fall, that we hadn't ended this war. We'd just given it time to grow. The first sign came 3 months later. We were 3 sectors deep into a suppression op when Command circulated a secure briefing. Unusual activity near the old quarantine world. Long-range scans showed ships moving in and out of orbit, unregistered, fast, heavily shielded. They called it smuggling. I knew better. Smuggling meant trade. Trade meant organization. Organization meant the survivors weren't just surviving anymore. They were rebuilding. A year later, the rumors turned into confirmed reports. An ambush on a Deathworlder patrol in a neighboring system. No survivors. The attackers used weapons we'd never seen before. Compact, high-yield, designed for tearing through our armor like paper. When the recovery crews sifted through the wreckage, they found an insignia burned into one of the blast walls, a jagged, curling mark that didn't match any known faction. I recognized it. It was carved into the desk of that school we'd burned on the second day of the purge. 2 years after that, they hit a colony. Not just a raid, an occupation. They swept in fast, drove the garrison into the hills, and took control of the settlement. Civilians were herded into holding zones, supply lines were cut, comms were jammed. It was a mirror of what we'd done to them. We were dispatched immediately. When we hit orbit, the first thing I saw on the colony's surface was smoke, rising in the exact same pattern I'd seen from their city. History wasn't repeating. It was answering. We fought them for months. They were smarter now, better armed, and they fought like we had taught them. Direct when it served them, vicious when it didn't. They didn't just kill our soldiers. They dismantled our footholds, stripped our equipment, and vanished into the terrain before we could pin them down. Every time I saw their tactics, I saw myself in them. Every brutal choice, every calculated burn, they'd learned from us. They'd learned because of us. The war didn't end. Not there, not anywhere. They spread. Small cells at first, then fleets. They didn't call themselves an empire, but they didn't have to. Worlds started falling to them the same way they'd fallen to us. Fast, hard. Final. Somewhere in that growing storm, I started hearing a name. Not a faction name, not a code. Just a word in their language that no human could pronounce cleanly. When I finally got a translation, it stopped me cold. It meant those who survived the purge. Years later, on another broken world, I saw him. The kid. He was taller now, lean muscle under dark armor, a rifle in his hands. His eyes were the same. We stared at each other across a field of smoke and shattered stone, both of us armed, both of us surrounded by the dead and dying. He didn't fire. Neither did I. Because we both knew this was never going to be settled in one shot. We'd started something neither of us could finish. And until one of us burned the other down to nothing, it would keep going. We were Deathworlders. We ended problems permanently. But some problems learn. Some problems remember. And those are the ones that come back for you. The war never really ended. Not for me, not for them. not for the worlds caught between us. Years later, I'd find myself staring out at the stars from the deck of another ship, another mission, another containment. The names of the planets changed. The faces of my crew changed. The enemies changed. But the smell of burned stone and blood never left. Some nights I'd dream of that first planet, not the battles, but the quiet after. The streets littered with ash. The look on the alien leader's face when he told me we'd see each other again. The kid vanishing into the smoke with nothing but hate to keep him warm. We'd told ourselves we ended the threat. We hadn't. We'd just taught it how to fight back. Now their fleets moved like shadows between the stars. Their strikes were faster, cleaner, harder to trace. Colonies burned in patterns I recognized because I'd designed them. Every victory they claimed was another echo of the lessons we'd carved into their bones. Sometimes I wonder if Command realizes what we created. If they understand that every time we break a world, we plant the seeds for the next enemy. I know. And I know one day, somewhere out there in the dark, I'll see that kid again. Maybe on the bridge of a warship. Maybe across the barrel of a rifle. Maybe standing over me in the dust, with the same quiet patience his leader once had. If that day comes, I won't beg. I won't ask for mercy. Deathworlders don't. But I'll understand, because I taught him how to end problems permanently. And now I'm the problem,